Will come to order. Senator Moran, who is the ranking member, will join us shortly. He is on the phone. There's also a vote going on right now, 2 votes, and so we expect members of the subcommittee to come in and out, but we wanted to go ahead and begin because we know that the Director Wray has a hard stop at 4:30, so we want to make sure that we can get in as much of the hearing as possible. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing to review the President's fiscal year 2024 funding requests for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Drug Enforcement Administration. Our witnesses today are FBI Director Christopher Wray and DEA Administrator Ann Milgram. It's very nice to have you both here again. Thank you for joining us. I want to begin by saying how deeply saddened I am that once again we have our hearing with the FBI in the aftermath of yet another mass shooting. Nearly a year ago, we met just after the horrific shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Today we meet after a gunman opened fire over the weekend in a shopping mall in a Dallas, Texas suburb, killing 8 people. I offer my condolences, and I'm sure I speak for everyone on this subcommittee, to all those who've lost loved ones. But what I know we really want are policies that help keep Americans safe. I personally stand ready to work across the aisle to build on the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act and to do everything I can working with the Department of Justice to better serve and protect, because we all know the American people deserve that. We count on the more than 37,000 employees of the FBI to protect our country from violent criminals, terrorists, and others who mean us great harm. And we charge the more than 9,000 employees of the DEA with combating the most devastating drug crisis in our nation's history. I want to thank all of those employees for their dedication and service to this country. But we need to do more to help them do their jobs and to prevent needless American deaths, whether they are by guns, fentanyl poisoning, or other drugs. The FBI's budget request of $11.3 billion includes additional resources for combating domestic terrorism and violent crimes. I want to hear from you, Director Wray, where the FBI has lacked the resources to address rising threats of violence against vulnerable Americans by criminals and criminal organizations, and how this request will help fill those gaps. We also have a different kind of violence being waged against Americans with illicit drugs like fentanyl that are flowing into this country. The introduction of fentanyl to the substance use disorder crisis has had a deadly and devastating impact in my home state of New Hampshire, but throughout the United States. We have a generation of grandparents who are raising their grandchildren, and for some it's because parents were separated from kids due to their addiction, but tragically for others it's because parents did not survive their addiction. Now with the rise of social media, we're seeing another younger generation become more vulnerable than ever to marketing of these drugs and to the increased accessibility that means. Everything must be done to stop the next generation from succumbing to this epidemic, as well as new threats on the horizon. This includes the spread of xylazine, which is Narcan resistant, which means that it's even more deadly. And it's a growing problem, again, in New Hampshire, in New England, and across this country. Administrator Milgram, I want to hear from you if the DEA's requested increase of $98 million is sufficient for the DEA's work both inside and outside the U.S. and to combat the Mexican cartels and their Chinese suppliers, as well as other threats that you know are coming. I was pleased to hear last week's announcements on the major results of Operation Spector and Operation Last Mile, which targeted the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels responsible for fentanyl and opioid trafficking. But these criminal organizations are sophisticated. They weaponize the tools of social media, chemistry, violence, intimidation, bribery trade, and money laundering, all to trick people into taking deadly drugs. What do both the DEA and FBI need to take on these transnational criminal organizations? not just sufficient funding, but are there other tools given to you? For example, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is set to expire at the end of this year, and how important is that? Director Wray and Administrator Milgram, I look forward to your testimony and our discussion today, and I think we will go ahead and ask you to begin your testimony, and when Ranking Member Moran comes in, he will submit his opening remarks. So I will ask you to begin, Director Wray.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Shaheen and members of the subcommittee. There is no question that today's threats are more sophisticated and move more quickly than ever before. And to stay ahead of them, we've requested important enhancements to our budget that will help us tackle the wide range of threats that we face, and I look forward to discussing those with you this afternoon. Let me start with cyber. Today's cyber threats are more pervasive, hit a wider variety of victims, and carry the potential for greater damage than ever before. You take China, a key part of the Chinese government's multi-pronged strategy to lie, cheat, and steal their way to surpassing us as the global superpower is cyber. The scale of the Chinese cyber threat is unparalleled. They've got a bigger hacking program than that of every other major nation combined, and they have stolen more of Americans' personal and corporate data than every nation, big or small, combined. To give you a sense of what we're up against, if every single one of the FBI's cyber agents and intelligence analysts focused exclusively on the China threat, nothing but China, Chinese hackers would still outnumber FBI cyber personnel by at least 50 to 1. And of course, China's hardly the only challenge in cyberspace, not even close. We're, as we speak, investigating over 100 different ransomware variants, each of them with scores of victims, as well as a host of other novel threats posed by both cyber criminals and nation-state actors alike, in addition to China, countries like Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And it's getting more and more challenging to discern where nation-state threat activity ends and cyber criminal threat activity begins. Recently, we've seen cyber attacks targeting the critical infrastructure and services that ordinary Americans rely on every day. I'm talking about places like hospitals, schools, 911 call centers. And the FBI has investigations into destructive attacks like these all over the country in communities both large and small, which is why in this year's budget request, you will see our need for 192 more cyber positions and a little over $63 million. We will put those critical resources towards ensuring that the FBI remains the world's premier cyber investigative agency by taking the fight to our adversaries through joint sequenced operations and rapid information sharing with the private sector, by building out our model cyber squads, each tackling multiple threats in more field offices, placing investigators, analysts, and other key professionals close to the victims that need us, and by providing our workforce with critical cutting-edge training. Our opponents in this space are relentless, and we need your help to ensure that we've got the resources. Last year, working with our state and local partners, through our hundreds of FBI-led violent crime task forces, we arrested more than 20,000 violent criminals. That's an average of 55 bad guys per day, every day, taken off the streets. As part of our FY24 budget, we're requesting an increase to build on our efforts to combat the rising violent crime that affects so many communities all across this country. And a big part of that will also go towards our investigations of crimes against children and human trafficking. Every year, the FBI and our partners identify and locate thousands of victims of child exploitation and human trafficking, and the enhancement that we've requested will allow us to add even more personnel to that vital effort. And finally, I've described the threat of gangs and cartels moving fentanyl and other deadly substances across the border and into communities all over the country as a threat of epidemic proportion. And I'm not the kind of guy that uses words like epidemic lightly. We're now pursuing investigations against transnational organized criminal groups in all 56 FBI field offices and have more than 300, it's close to 400 now, active investigations into cartel leadership specifically. On top of that, we're leveraging international partnerships through our legal attaché offices to enhance investigations and gather and share intelligence, and we're actively participating in 6 OCDETF strike forces along the border. And although we at the FBI are not the agency tasked with the physical security of our borders, we are committed to doing our part to work with our partners to tackle these very real and very serious threats. As part of that effort, we've asked for $53 million in part to keep pace with the 7-fold increase in DNA samples from individuals crossing the border that we're testing on behalf of DHS. Over the past couple of years, we've provided critical DNA testing support to 223 investigations, including more than 100 sexual assaults and a dozen homicides, all based on matches from DNA samples collected at the border by Customs and Border Protection. And we expect that volume to increase as border crossings increase, and we need your support to continue to process these samples, which so often provide the missing piece of the puzzle to solve serious violent crimes that might otherwise go unsolved if we're not able to process those border crossing DNA samples. So in that summary, I've really barely scratched the surface. The breadth and depth of the threats the American people look to us to protect them from is staggering. And I am proud to be here today representing the 38,000 men and women of the FBI who work tirelessly and selflessly to meet that challenge every single day. And I want to thank you for your support of our men and women in helping us carry out that mission, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you very much. Ranking Member Moran has joined us, and he has very graciously suggested that we go ahead with your testimony, Administrator Milgram, before he gives his opening remarks.
I'll get a chance to speak at some point in time.
Thank you so much, Chair Shaheen, Ranking Member Moran, and members of the committee. Americans today are experiencing the most devastating drug crisis in our nation's history. It is like nothing we have seen before. This is because one drug, fentanyl, has transformed the criminal landscape. Fentanyl is cheap to make, easy to disguise, and deadly to those who take it. Just 2 milligrams, the equivalent of a few grains of salt, can kill a person. It is the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45 today. More than terrorism, more than car accidents, more than cancer, and more than COVID. And it is killing Americans from all walks of life in every state and community in this country. Nearly 200 Americans each day. The drug cartels responsible for bringing fentanyl into this country are transnational and extremely violent criminal enterprises. They rely on a global supply chain to manufacture and traffic fentanyl, and they rely on a global illicit financial network to pocket billions of dollars from those drug sales. At DEA, we have undertaken a transformation of our own to meet this moment. We have transformed our vision. We are now laser focused on the criminal organizations responsible for flooding our fentanyl into our communities, the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco cartel. We have transformed our plan. We have built an entirely new strategic layer with 2 counter threat teams, one for the Sinaloa cartel and one for the Jalisco cartel. These teams are made up of special agents, intel analysts, targeters, data scientists, and chemical and finance experts from across our agency. The teams centralize all of DEA's intelligence, they map these cartels, and they analyze the criminal networks that today exist in more than 40 countries around the world. They're also developing targeting information on the members of those networks wherever they operate around the world. And we have transformed our execution. We are drawing on the talent and intelligence of the men and women in our 334 offices worldwide. And we are working as one DEA to defeat the criminal networks. We've made all these changes in the last 2 years with urgency to save lives, stop fentanyl, and to defeat the drug cartels that are responsible for bringing fentanyl into our communities. And we are already starting to see results. On April 14th, 2023, DEA announced indictments against the network that is primarily responsible for the massive influx of fentanyl into the United States, the Chapitos network of the Sinaloa cartel. The Chapitos pioneered the manufacture and trafficking of fentanyl into the United States, and they control a global criminal enterprise that has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. So the DEA proactively targeted the Chapitos network, and we followed it across the globe. From China, where the Chapitos partner with Chinese chemical companies and brokers to acquire fentanyl precursors, the ingredients necessary to make fentanyl, to Mexico, their home base, where they run secret laboratories and transform those chemicals into fentanyl powder and fake pills, and then smuggle it into the United States by land, by air, by sea, and by underground tunnel. And then in the United States, where the fentanyl makes its way from stash houses near the southwest border across our country, reaching both coasts and everywhere in between. The indictments we announced in April charged 28 members of the Chapitos network. 8 members of that network are now in custody, 7 of them overseas, and we are requesting their extradition. But DEA did not stop there. Last week, on May 5th, 2023, we announced the results of Operation Last Mile, where we tracked down and arrested 3,337 associates of the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels here in the United States. Our operation showed how the Chapitos and others in the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels partner with violent local street gangs, multi-city distribution networks, and individual drug dealers across our country to get fentanyl across the last mile of distribution onto our streets and onto social media. These networks use social media applications, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and encrypted platforms like WhatsApp, Telegram, and Signal to run their operations and to get fentanyl into the hands of Americans. They hide that fentanyl. They hide it in fake pills that look like oxycodone, Percocet, Adderall, or Xanax. They hide it by mixing it in with cocaine, with heroin, and methamphetamine, all to induce Americans to take fentanyl without knowing it and to get them hooked. As part of Operation Last Mile, we seized more than 6,500 pounds of fentanyl powder, more than 43 million fake pills laced with fentanyl, 91,000 pounds of methamphetamine, 8,400 guns, and over $100 million. And this is just the beginning. The 10,000 employees that I have the privilege of working with at DEA are the most committed and mission-driven people that I have ever worked with in my career. They are laser focused on one goal: to stop fentanyl, to defeat the cartels, and to save American lives. Every day, the men and women in our 334 offices around the globe risk their lives for this mission. As administrator, I have worked hard to empower our teams with the people, technology, and resources they need to confront the current crisis. But we all must do more. I ask for Congress's continued support so that together we may protect the national security, safety, and health of the American people. Thank you.
Thank you both for your testimony. We now have a critical number of senators here, so let me just point out that we hope to go into a closed session for a classified discussion at 3:45. So we're going to ask folks if they could try and stay within the 5-minute question period as you're asking questions. And again, we need to go back to Senator Moran for his opening statement.
Chairwoman, thank you very much. And I'll shorten my statement significantly. And if I also would just want you to know that I appreciate the efforts to coordinate today's hearing and the votes and having a classified briefing. I would also, as the chairwoman did, note the massive shooting in Allen, Texas. Painful, sickening reminder that evil still exists in our world. And Director Wray, I trust the FBI will lead a thorough investigation into this shooting and your work your team does to help us determine why and how this could happen and inform federal, state, and local law enforcement how we prevent more mass shootings from happening. Director Wray, you've appeared before this subcommittee many times, at least annually since I've been a member of it. Administrator, you are new to this subcommittee. I think it's been 8 years since the DEA administrator has appeared before this appropriations subcommittee, and I welcome you. I think this is a useful addition to our information and knowledge, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Tomorrow, and I heard as I came in the director talking about Title 42 with its lift tomorrow on Thursday. I assume the DEA will face an onslaught of challenges related to its mission of preventing cartels and drug trafficking across the southern border. And I note that the FBI is expecting a crush of DNA samples that will be required of testing. You've asked for additional dollars to accomplish that mission. I look forward to hearing from both of you on the consequences of Title 42 and what we do in regard to our border. I'll save the rest of my opening statement I'll ask for my opening statement to be submitted for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will begin the question round now, and again, hoping everyone will stick within the 5 minutes. I will try very hard to do that. My first question is really for both of you. Director Wray, you referenced in your opening statement the OCDF strike forces, and that stands for Organized Crime Drug Task Forces. Can you talk a little more, both of you actually, about the benefits of OCDF and what those strike forces do as we're trying to combat the substance misuse crisis in this country?
So I'll start. I think, to me, when I think of OCDF, I really think of when it's working at its best, there are really two concepts. One is the value of partnership, and the other is the importance of intelligence. The value of partnership, both because in this world of limited resources and a seemingly unlimited threat, in this case, the flood of really poison into this country, courtesy of the cartels, we have to look for ways to working closely with our partners to maximize impact. And then the intelligence side, I think, again, when OCDF is working at its best, it's focused on how to prioritize, how to be strategic, so that team partnership effort is really focused on what we can do collectively to really maximize the impact, because we're up against a very sophisticated set of adversaries.
Administrator, can you also speak to, as we discussed on our call, I was in Colombia last month, and one of the things we heard as we were meeting with folks there is a recognition that we're now seeing cocaine mixed with fentanyl. Can you also speak to that and how OCDF is looking specifically at fentanyl?
Yes, Senator. It's one of the things that we've seen across the United States over the past year is we have seen what the cartels and their drug distributors across the United States are doing is, in addition to these fake pills that they make to look exactly like real medicines, they're hiding fentanyl in drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin, and they are marketing and selling those drugs as though they were as if they were only cocaine, only meth, only heroin. And we've seen Americans die across the United States from drug poisonings. We issued a public safety letter last year to our law enforcement partners to alert them to this. We want everyone to understand the risk of fentanyl. It is the deadliest drug we've ever seen widespread in the United States. It is 50 times more addictive than heroin, and just a tiny amount can kill someone. So many Americans do not know that they're taking it, and they're dying.
It's really frightening, as I hear from constituents in New Hampshire on a regular basis. This is a more parochial question because we have a new DEA lab going into Manchester, New Hampshire, that is going to be really critical as we look at how we can identify different drugs that we're seeing, and that's important if we're going to prosecute those people responsible. But that project has been delayed longer than I thought it should be. So can you talk about how we're going to move that project forward and get it done so we can use it to help get drugs off the street?
Yes, Senator, I share your concern on this because we have 9 DEA labs across the United States today, and we are doing everything to work as quickly as we can, but we have never seen more fentanyl in the United States. We have never seen more methamphetamine. And so we need the ability to have this additional lab to process all the fentanyl, methamphetamine, and other drugs that are coming into the United States and across the country. So our understanding is that that project has been delayed. This is not a permanent solution, but we will be operational this summer, working as one DEA. Our field division is going to give us space, so we are already starting to hire chemists, and we will work out of our local field division to do as much as we possibly can while we're waiting for that space to get built.
Well, thank you. I am ready to do anything I can to help move this project along, so we will stay in very close touch. Director Wray, in the few seconds that I have left, can you talk about the FISA 702 authority and why that's so important to our work to track down transnational criminal organizations and drug lords?
So Section 702 is sort of the critical ingredient for the entire intelligence community to protect Americans from foreign threats overseas that affect our national security. And it is what we rely on to protect Americans from international terrorism, from cyber espionage, from cyber attacks, from foreign adversaries, but also, as Director Burns, I think, has cited in some public testimony of his own, it has been very useful in illuminating, with the Mexican drug cartels in particular, drug networks and global supply chains. Again, if you think about foreign threats, you've got the Mexican drug cartels getting chemicals from China. So you got 2 foreign threats, in effect, combined with one. And the ability to be agile as these adversaries, much as Administrator Milgram referenced in some of her comments already, the reliance on technology by these adversaries requires the intelligence community to be able to be agile and nimble and not to be constantly playing catch-up with the bad guys. And that's where 702 becomes so important. But again, it's focused on foreign adversaries, not Americans, overseas, but it's foreign threats overseas that impact us here.
Well, thank you. I'm sure we'll get into it more in the closed session. I'm going to now turn the mic over to Senator Moran and go vote. And if anybody else has not yet voted on the first vote, the time has run out. Thank you. Senator Moran.
Has somebody voted on the first vote that can take over the chair when I'll leave when after I ask my questions and vote? Thank you. Let me start with the administrator. Welcome again. Thank you. Thanks for the conversations we've had over a period of time. I wanted to highlight for you that I met with President Lopez Obrador of Mexico on a bipartisan, bicameral congressional delegation to Mexico City last month. I think he and I had a promising discussion about addressing synthetic opioids that are flooding across our southern border. My request of him is that we would do more to fight guns going to the south. Could he ask China to eliminate the precursor chemicals that are coming from China to Mexico? He indicated he was willing to do that. My understanding, at least from press reports, is that he has made that request in writing with China, with the Chinese government. Perhaps it's a development that has some benefit, but the fact remains that our two countries have had our challenges in cooperation in the drug wars, and I know the DEA remains significantly constrained in its capabilities or its abilities to operate in a way that you wish they could within those borders. Anything that would confirm that China will abide by the request of the president from Mexico and give me an understanding of the state of affairs between drug enforcement in the United States and the situation in Mexico.
Thank you, Senator. And I think it's really important to start the conversation on China because that is where this problem largely begins today. The vast majority of precursor chemicals that are going to Mexico and being made into fentanyl powder, as you note, are coming from China. We recently, in the Chapitos case, part of that indictment charges 4 Chinese nationals and a chemical broker from Guatemala with sourcing those chemicals to make fentanyl for the Chapitos, the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel right now. And importantly, in those charges and those allegations, we have included information that one of the Chinese nationals said that they knew that those chemicals were going to be used for fentanyl, and also that they were going to hide what those chemicals were in order to ship them out. So we have called on China to stop the shipment of precursor chemicals to Mexico as well. And we are, right now, for over a year, we have not had law enforcement cooperation with China. So we do have offices in China. We continue to try to work there because we believe it's vital to attack the entire supply chain. Right now, we're doing a network-wide approach that is looking at every piece. So we are targeting the Chinese precursor chemical companies as part of our work. Those chemicals now going into Mexico, my deepest concern, Senator, is that there is no limit on the amount of fentanyl or methamphetamine that the cartels can make beyond those chemicals. So that is the only limit right now. And so we must urgently work at that point. In terms of Mexico, we are very much looking to continue to work with Mexico and Mexican law enforcement. They recently arrested Ovidio Guzman, one of the Chapitos, which we thought was an important step forward. And of course, last year, they arrested RCQ. We do now want them to work with us together. We have 16 additional Mexican nationals who have not yet been arrested as part of the Chapitos investigation. It's vital to us. We have 7 folks in custody, but it's vital to us that we get everyone that's a part of that case extradited eventually to the United States to stand justice in a court of law here.
Well, I was pleased to see that the Mexican president did what he told me he would do, which was to make that request. I don't know what the Chinese response will be, and you've made that request. I guess you haven't had a response, or nothing's changed since you made that request, I assume.
Yes, Senator, we have not had a response, but we will continue to do the work we're doing and to target these largely unregulated chemical companies in China.
I spent time with DEA agents when I was in Mexico, and I admire and respect their work. Director Wray, you spent an enormous amount of your time warning us about us as policymakers about the Republic of China and its threat to our economy and our national security. I also note that you were successful in closing China's Ministry of Public Security in New York City. Is that a rare circumstance, or do these public security facilities continue to operate in the United States there or elsewhere?
So we have been successful in our law enforcement actions in getting the facility in New York shut down. And of course, we've recently announced some arrests, which include obstruction of justice charges. And frankly, it is outrageous that the Chinese government would think that they could operate a facility like that in the United States without proper coordination. It violates our sovereignty, and it shows a flagrant disregard for well-established processes in the rule of law. And I wish I could tell you that their disregard for the rule of law was an aberration. I would say it's a pattern. And to me, it fits into a pattern that I've been calling out for some time now, which is harassment, stalking, intimidation, surveillance, blackmail of dissidents and critics of the CCP who live here in the United States. They don't do it only in the United States. They inflict the same kind of harm on dissidents in other countries as well. But if they try to use stations like the one in New York to conduct that kind of activity, they're going to keep encountering the FBI.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Senator Moran. On behalf of Chairman Shaheen, I'll recognize myself. I want to commend both of you and the men and women of your agencies for the extraordinary work they do. Director Wray, Secretary Yellen has indicated that we will likely default on June 1st unless Congress takes action, and Speaker McCarthy has indicated that he does not intend to take default off the table. As a member of the Intelligence Committee, as the FBI assess whether our adversaries, Russia and China, particularly China, will exploit a potential default in order to propagate disinformation or even other activities internationally to strengthen their economic position and weaken ours?
I guess I would start by saying that, consistent in some ways with my answer to Senator Moran, I think there's a pretty clear record now of the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, taking advantage of any avenue they can to try to gain the upper hand against us. As to the specific question, I think I don't think I have anything to add to what Director Haynes testified to, I think before you in the Armed Services Committee, but I would associate myself with her comments.
And her comments was she fully expects that they would exploit it to the best, to the degree possible, to the best degree possible for them. Administrator, thank you for your good work. I've got some questions about fentanyl for the director. Director, do you think the FBI should be fully engaged in the fight against fentanyl?
I think we should be, and I think we are. I will say we can always use more resources against the fight. I think Administrator Milgram did a very good job of outlining just how massive the problem is, and it requires a team effort, and we work very closely with the DEA. Our focus is on really what it is the FBI, through its unique authorities, expertise, and resources, can contribute to the team fight. And I'd be happy to talk about what those are.
All right. Now, speaking about resources, again, the House has passed a bill that would likely cut all agencies except the Defense Department by about 22%. So rather than having more resources, you would have significantly less. Is the arithmetic right?
So a cut of that magnitude would be disastrous, not just for the really hard-working public servants, career law enforcement professionals of the FBI, but more importantly, in many ways, on the American people that they're sworn to protect. It is not uncommon for me to get briefed on single seizures from probably every state represented on this subcommittee, single seizures of enough fentanyl to wipe out an entire state. One operation, one seizure by one squad and one field office. So a cut of that magnitude would mean countless seizures that wouldn't happen and countless more fentanyl pills affecting neighborhoods all over this country.
It would also inhibit your ability to grow your cybersecurity force. Would that be accurate?
Also, we are, as I said in my opening statement, dealing with, in the Chinese cyber program alone, an adversary that essentially outnumbers us 50 to 1, and that's just China. And if you then add on top of that the 100-plus ransomware variants that we're investigating, each one of those with scores and scores of victims, we need more resources for cyber, which is why our enhancement asks for that, not less. And a cut would mean scores more attacks on American critical infrastructure, American hospitals, American schools, American 911 call centers from nation states and cyber criminals alike. So again, it would be the American people who would be hurt the most.
Well, thank you for that very candid answer. And Administrator, cuts like that would also endanger the progress you've made, which is significant.
Yes, Senator. Cuts like that would be devastating for our work. We are already about 600 agents down, and so we are running 8 classes this year. That kind of a cut would mean that we couldn't onboard any of the more than 400 agents we are scheduled to bring on board. It also would set us back dramatically in the work that we're doing across the world to map the cartels and to be able to put the right tools and technology into the men and women of DEA's hands. We have a technology and a data system that is over 20 years old, and it is well past time that we are updating it. So we're building an entire mission operating system that will allow us to break silos, share information across DEA, and also really manage the agency more effectively. So for many reasons, it would be devastating for our work.
Thank you very much, both of you and the men and women of your agencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reid. We are going to go out of order a little bit because we have the chair of the Appropriations Committee with us, and we're delighted she's here. So, Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you and Ranking Member Moran and all the work you're doing with these continues as we work to make sure we are assessing our country's needs and working to live up to our responsibility to craft and pass bills to deliver the funding our communities need in a timely and bipartisan way. Keeping this momentum going is really important because there are real stakes for our families here if we let our work fall behind or cuts loom or chaos reign. None of our global competitors are debating whether they should invest in their future. And we have to remember that keeping our country safe and secure doesn't just mean a strong military, it means a fair, functioning system of justice and law enforcement protecting our communities and our rights. We cannot keep our families safe from threats like drug trafficking, including deadly fentanyl, domestic terrorism, cyber attacks, or white supremacy and the uptick in hate crimes and violent attacks without making sure that our law enforcement agencies have the resources they need to be effective and keep people safe, which is part of what makes the House Republicans' plans so alarming. You just outlined some of the impacts of that. Reading it, I see that House Republicans voted to essentially fire nearly 30,000 law enforcement personnel, and that's in just year one. Those severe budget caps would mean more cuts to our law enforcement budgets every year for the next decade. So I hope that we can all agree now is not the time to fire or furlough or freeze hiring of our drug enforcement officers, our agents, our attorneys, intelligence analysts, cyber experts, all who are working to keep our country and communities and families safe. And to do that, we have to make sure that we provide our federal law enforcement agencies with the tools they need, not blow a massive hole in their budgets. So I appreciate our witnesses being here today and having this opportunity to have this hearing, because I hope really that we can all work together to reject those severe cuts and agree to make reasonable investments in these agencies. I just have a couple questions. Senator Reid asked you about the 22% cut that has been proposed or voted on in the House. I think we all have to be cognizant of the impacts of that as we move forward. But let me ask you, Director Wray, criminal organizations are increasingly using technology for criminal activities like drug trafficking and cybercrime and violent extremism. As they continue to do more online, the United States has to adapt and anticipate and combat those threats. Does the FBI have the resources it needs to combat cyber-related threats from criminal organizations? And what are the greatest cyber threats that you see facing us today?
So I would mention a few things. So first, I strongly agree that our adversaries, not just nation states, but sophisticated transnational criminal organizations, are relying more and more on sophisticated technology. There's a lot of ways in which our budget requests ask for more resources to deal with that, but I would highlight one in particular, which is our request for enhancement that focuses on our ability to focus on the dark web and cryptocurrency, because one of the things that we're seeing is the dark web has become essentially a rogues gallery of different kinds of criminal products and services, and the payment mechanism for those deadly products and services is typically cryptocurrency. And so one place where I think the need for enhancements are particularly acute is to help us grow our scale to deal with those issues. We just had last week Operation Spector, I think it was, that was the largest ever seizure of fentanyl trafficked on the dark web. And that's coming on the heels of, we need more operations like that to dismantle the darknet marketplaces and to go after the cryptocurrency that is after all, these are profit-motivated adversaries. And so we've gotten better in cybercrime and on cyber threats at chasing the crypto and seizing the crypto. but we need to be able to scale that because the threat is metastasizing.
Administrator Milgram, in a recent press release, the DEA stated that in Operation Last Mile, which targeted drug trafficking by the Sinaloa and the Jalisco cartels, more than 1,100 cases involved social media and encrypted communications platforms. How has the DEA adapted to the use of technology by these criminal drug networks?
Senator, it's a really important question because we are in the process of adapting and transforming to do just this. What we have seen is that the drug cartels, as Director Wray has said, they have evolved since really 2014, 2015 with the onset of fentanyl. They are nimble, they are deadly, and they are literally putting fentanyl onto our streets and all over social media in a way that we had never seen before. And so in Operation Last Mile, we talk about social media is solving the last mile problem for the cartels. They are getting the drugs into people's hands by think about hundreds of millions of Americans have cell phones and they have social media accounts. And so within a matter of clicks, they are marketing oftentimes things that they're fentanyl, but they're marketed as if they were real prescription medicines like oxycodone. And just to tell you one story, one of our operations and investigations from Last Mile, just down the road from here in Washington, D.C., Diamond Lynch was a 20-year-old mom, and she took what she thought was a Percocet pill. It was fentanyl. She died. And she was at the time planning her son's first-year-old birthday party. She never saw that day. Our agents working with...
She bought it online?
She did not buy it online. The online part comes in a minute. So she purchased it through a dealer that she knew. Our agents and the local police worked together to identify that dealer. They then traced it back to the source of supply in Los Angeles that was working with other suppliers on Instagram. We then traced it back directly to the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico. And that's the kind of work we are now transforming our agency to be able to do, to trace everything and link it back to the cartels and to identify the entire global supply chain, including that supply chain across the United States, that distribution network that is leading to the deaths of 107,735 Americans between August of 2021 and August of 2022.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for taking me out of order.
Thank you, Senator Murray. Senator Haggerty.
Thank you, Chair Shaheen, and thank you to our guest here today. Director Wray, I'd like to start with you. Senator Grassley and Chairman Comer subpoenaed an FBI document containing an allegation regarding a pay-to-play scheme between then Vice President Biden and a foreign national, and your response was due just a little bit earlier today. So my question is, has the FBI complied with the subpoena for this document?
I believe we submitted a lengthy letter earlier today.
A letter, but not the document that was the subject of the subpoena request?
I can't speak to the specific document. We are committed to working collaboratively with both committees, but we also have to balance sources and methods in ongoing investigations, and we will continue to work through the accommodation process as has happened many times in the past.
Was there a plan to submit the document, or will it be never submitted, or has there been a conclusion?
I would refer to the letter, which is, I think, quite detailed and kind of goes through a fair amount of discussion about our proposed approach
to addressing the document. I do want to confirm, though, the document does exist, the FD 1023.
I really can't get into the specifics here. I will tell you that we understand completely the importance of congressional oversight. That's important to me. I also understand very much, as I think you do, the importance of us protecting sources and methods and ongoing investigations, and we're committed to try to work through the process.
I had a frustrating conversation last year with Attorney General Garland about something I'm still trying to understand here, and that's how the Biden administration can impartially investigate the Biden family. So I want to come back to that with you, if I could, today, to get at it a little bit deeper. My first question is whether you or anybody else at the FBI has communicated with White House employees or with Attorney General Garland or with DOJ staff regarding investigations that pertain to President Biden or to any member of his family.
Well, I certainly have not communicated with the White House about any investigation on that subject. My instructions to our...
And would that also include Attorney General Garland and the DOJ staff?
Well, I don't know that I can get into any discussions I had with Attorney General Garland. I talk to him, probably every day, one way or another, about all sorts of investigations, so that one's a little trickier. But what I will tell you is, as you know, I'm an FBI director appointed by the previous president, and our agents in our Baltimore field office are working with a U.S. attorney from the previous administration, that is the U.S. attorney in Delaware, on, I think, the investigation you're referring to. And my expectations of our agents on every investigation, which I communicate like a broken record, are that we're to follow the facts wherever they lead, to whomever they lead, no matter who likes it, no matter who it makes happy or unhappy.
So would that Delaware U.S. attorney be the person then responsible for deciding about evidence of unlawful conduct by the president and about what to do with that evidence?
Well, again, I don't want to engage in hypotheticals, but the Delaware U.S. attorney is leading, I think, the investigation that has been publicly disclosed that you're, I think, referring to.
Let me just come back to what I'm trying to understand then. If the FBI has has uncovered evidence that alleges criminal conduct by the president.
Just tell me what. I'm sorry.
Sorry. And you then, I presume, hand this to the DOJ if you uncover this. But I understand the DOJ's policy is they're not going to charge a sitting president while that person is president. And the DOJ is not going to provide that information to Congress, not going to comply with subpoenas for documents. It feels to me like it's a dog chasing its tail. And the question is, if illegal conduct is alleged or uncovered, how does the Congress or the American public ever get that evidence?
Well, the decisions made by DOJ about how to staff prosecutions, which U.S. attorney's offices, which counsel to appoint, all those sorts of things are entrusted by regulation to the department, to the Attorney General. I can speak to what the FBI's role is and my expectations of FBI agents, and those are the ones I've communicated.
But to be clear, if evidence were uncovered by the FBI, you would hand that over to the DOJ. They then make the determination, whether it's the Attorney General or, in this case, the Delaware U.S. Attorney, what to do with that evidence. And again, their policy is not to charge a sitting president, and we can't get the evidence in Congress. Is that correct?
Decisions about who to charge, what to charge, those are decisions made by prosecutors at the Justice Department, including the U.S. Attorney in Delaware, and decisions about the Justice Department's communications about its decision-making are the Justice Department's decisions. I don't want to speak for them on that.
We're right back at where we started without being able to clarify how we have an impartial investigation here, and I appreciate the opportunity to get some oversight. It's just very frustrating when we can't. Thank you,
Thank you, Senator Haggerty. Again, we are pleased that the Vice Chair of the Appropriations Committee is also with us today, and so we are going to go ahead and ask her if she would like to give a statement and take her questions.
Thank you very much. You'll all be happy to know that I'm not going to do a statement, and we'll go straight to my questions. First of all, welcome to both of you. I so appreciate the work that you do. It is vitally important. Director Wray, and we also have talked, Administrator, I was trying to think whether you were a director or an administrator, Milgram. Last month, employees of a restaurant in Auburn, Maine, were shocked when they opened a box that they expected to contain mugs that they had ordered, and instead, they found 14 kilograms of fentanyl. That's an amount that is sufficient to kill the entire population of Maine 5 times over. Fortunately, the employees immediately called the local police, who are now working with federal partners on what is clearly a major interstate trafficking network. The FBI and the DEA play a key role in working with state and local law enforcement partners in combating drug smuggling, violent crime, and gangs in local community. Director Wray, We've had the opportunity to discuss the importance of these relationships during your visit to Maine last year, which I very much appreciated. In particular, I'm hoping for continued collaboration and support for the Southern Maine Gang Task Force and the New England Prescription Opioid Task Force, which was launched last June to address the illegal opioid prescriptions in Maine and in New Hampshire. Director Wray and Administrator Milgram, as you implement the budget, will you ensure that these programs receive as much support as possible?
Certainly on my end, these are both team efforts that are very important to me. And I know that, as you may recall from my visit, I guess last August, we, I think, are working more closely than ever with our state and local partners in Maine. And it meant a lot to me when one of our longtime state law enforcement partners said he'd seen the FBI move from what he called promise to presence, meaning instead of just talking about being there for them, we were just there and we could be counted on. And that's the kind of thing that I'm very grateful for, and that's the goal that I'm shooting for with all of our offices.
Senator, for us, we are incredibly fortunate to have more than 3,000 task force officers across the United States, and we also have incredible partnerships with state and local law enforcement. So in the example from the restaurant that you just gave in Maine, our agents responded and are actively working that investigation right now in partnership with the local police. The work that we did for Operation Last Mile, those 3,300 arrests, all of those were done in partnerships with local police chiefs, police departments, sheriffs. We could not do the work that we're doing across our communities without them. And so we are incredibly supportive of that work and of anything that brings us together, sharing information and working with them.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Administrator, in our 2024 budget hearing with the Attorney General, I expressed my dismay that while the department is requesting funds to hire hundreds of new attorneys in the litigating decisions, in antitrust, and headquarters offices, it is proposing to hire only 4 new DEA special agents. That is incredible to me. And it's particularly puzzling in the context of the drug overdose and poisoning crisis. I bet everybody here has experienced record highs in the number of people who have lost their lives in our home states. In Maine, it's a record 716 people last year, and 80% of the deaths were linked to fentanyl. So last year, Congress provided DEA $40 million above the president's budget request to support more than 120 additional new agents. Administrator Milgram, did you request more agents than the 4 that were granted to you?
So, Senator, if I could start by just thanking you for the additional $40 million last year. It's been incredibly important for our transformation at DEA. I believe that this year, because we have not yet hired those agents from last year, we would be onboarding 131 agents, 50 diversion investigators, and 35 intelligence analysts. But certainly, we can do more with more.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Wray, according to reporting, 8 people in Allen, Texas this past weekend who were murdered by a man who allegedly held white supremacist views. You and I have discussed the fact that white supremacists and anti-government extremists really pose the greatest terrorist threat in the country, domestic terrorism threat here in the homeland for many years. And as you know, and we've talked about this, I'm still waiting for a complete accounting from the FBI and the DHS, which was mandated by a law that I wrote along with Senator Johnson in the 2019 NDAA. And certainly that information is important, because if you don't really have a full measure of what you're dealing with, it's difficult to know how to properly resource it. So my question for you, Director Wray, is can you please tell me specifically what in the fiscal year 24 budget request demonstrates that the FBI is prioritizing the investigation and the response to this significant domestic terrorism threat?
So I appreciate the question, and I have found our conversations on this topic to be very productive and helpful, and I know how important this is to you. In the fiscal 24 budget, we have requested an enhancement. So again, that's on top of the base funding, which is quite significant, devoted to this issue. That's a $13 million counterterrorism enhancement that would augment our ability to address investigative requirements, provide sophisticated tools necessary to proactively counter the threat. So it would do everything from increasing our investigative capacity, facilitating information sharing, identifying emerging trends to try to get better ahead of the threat, and to enhance our liaison relationships with law enforcement and the private sector. As you may recall, back in 2019, in the summer of 2019, I elevated racially motivated violent extremism to a national threat priority, which is the level of our highest priority threats. And we saw a significant growth in the number of investigations that we were conducting throughout 2020, and then, of course, certainly since then. And so we would look for the enhancement that I've just described to build on top of the base that we already have, because we can't really rob Peter to pay Paul. All these other threats we've been talking about are not subsiding at the same time that we're having to focus on terrorism.
So I just want to be clear, Director Wray, that the increase you're talking about is directly related to your efforts against domestic terrorism? Is that 100% allocated?
Yeah, the $13 million is specifically focused on domestic terrorism.
Okay, just want to be clear. Thank you. Administrator Milgram, frequently discussion about the movement of fentanyl focuses on the Department of Homeland Security seizures at ports of entry across the border. But as you know, there's critical work that needs to be done to deal with fentanyl much earlier, particularly when it comes to the supply chain. You discussed that in your opening remarks. And so my question is related to how do we deal with precursors in this long chain that leads to dangerous products coming into our country. My question is, how does the DA work specifically with the Department of Homeland Security to identify and investigate the illicit movement of precursors in fentanyl production? And are there additional tools or authorities that you believe are going to be necessary to enhance both the DEA and the DHS's ability to disrupt this supply chain in a significant way?
Thank you for raising this conversation, Senator, because I think it's vital that we be looking at this as a network problem. So traditionally, we've spent a lot of time focused on high-value targets, the leaders, for example, of the cartels. That work is important, but it is not nearly enough. We have now mapped with our counter-threat teams more than 6,000 members, associates, and facilitators of these two cartels in more than 40 countries worldwide. And again, these are the two cartels that we have identified as being most responsible for the deadly fentanyl on our streets today. This starts in China with the precursor chemicals, and then it goes to Mexico, where those chemicals are being used to make fentanyl. So we are targeting specifically those precursor chemical companies, both on the clear net and on the dark net, and the individuals who are engaged. Now, we do work closely with DHS. They have capacities related to cargo shipment. One of the challenges that we are all facing, though, is that right now, because the chemical industry is so under-regulated, as I mentioned earlier, in the Chapitos network case where we've charged 28 individuals, including 4 in China, they are hiding what those chemicals are as they're being shipped out. And so there's no know your customer requirement. There is no requirement that anything be correctly labeled. And so we are working as hard as we can with DHS and others to figure out how we can best infiltrate and adapt to be able to track those shipments and to stop them even before they get to Mexico.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Administrator, the two cartels that are sending fentanyl into the United States are located in Mexico, aren't they?
Yes, sir.
And isn't it a fact that we could stop those cartels in their tracks if President Lopez Obrador would invite American military and or law enforcement personnel to come into Mexico and work with his military and law enforcement personnel?
Senator, what I would say from my purview as the head of the DEA.
But is my statement true or not?
What I would say is that we're focused on the two cartels, who we believe are doing exactly what you say. They are responsible for the fentanyl coming.
Let me
to
ask
the
you
United
again.
States.
If President Lopez Obrador invited the American military and or American law enforcement officials to come into Mexico to work with the same in Mexico, we could stop the cartels, could we not?
Senator, I believe this is a whole of government effort and has to be, including whether it's the military, us, FBI,
Now,
and others.
Madam Administrator, I've listened to you here for almost an hour telling us how bad fentanyl is. Thank you for that, but we know.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask you a third time. If President Lopez Obrador invited the American military and or law enforcement personnel to come into Mexico and work with the same in Mexico, we could stop the cartels. Isn't that a fact?
So, Senator, I can speak to the law enforcement side of this, and you just mentioned law enforcement. I believe that this is vital for both Mexico and the United States. Mexicans are dying as well, as we showed in the Chapitos.
Well, then why don't we stop them?
So
would it help? Let me ask you a fourth time. Would it help if President Lopez Obrador, I don't think it's a complicated question, Madam Administrator. You're asking us for more money every year, more money, and it gets worse, worse, and worse. You know, in the real world, the nitty-gritty of the real world, when you fail, you get fired. In government, when you fail, you get more money because obviously you need it. Now, let me ask you a fourth time. If President Lopez Obrador, and I'd appreciate an answer, if President Lopez Obrador invited the American military and or law enforcement personnel to come into Mexico and work with his, we could stop the cartels, couldn't we?
I believe, Senator, that we can stop the cartels.
Okay, have you made that suggestion to President Biden?
If I could, I believe that we can stop the cartels by...
Have you made that suggestion to President Biden?
Senator, I have been very vocal in the whole of government setting on the importance of fentanyl and all of us using every single effort and authority that we have.
Why hasn't President Biden done it? I mean, this is the way the American people whose sons and daughters are dying look at it. Our economy is $23 trillion. Mexico's economy is $1.3 trillion. Ours is 18 times bigger. We buy $400 billion every year from Mexico. Without the people of America, Mexico, figuratively speaking, would be eating cat food out of a can and living in a tent behind an outback. So why don't you and the president, embarrassing no one, get on the phone and call President Lopez Obrador and make him a deal he can't refuse to allow our military and our law enforcement officials to go into Mexico and work with his to stop the cartels? Why don't you do that?
Senator, what I am doing every single day is working with the incredible men and women of DEA who are risking their lives across 334 offices worldwide.
And I appreciate that, but you're not doing what would work. Why won't you do what will work?
Senator, we are...
Why don't you call the president this afternoon and say, Mr. President, let's call President Lopez Obrador privately and make him a deal he can't refuse. Because we both know that President Lopez Obrador has neither the ability nor the will to stop the cartels. But yet we go along and pretend that they're our friends, and Mexico is our friend. But he has criminal organizations that are killing our people, and you know how to stop it, and the president does. And you're not doing it.
Senator, we are working every day to stop it. And
But you're not doing what would stop it.
We are transforming, and we are working in countless ways across the globe to do what needs to be done for the American people. And there is nothing that the
You know,
men and
when
women,
it's important to you, you make it happen. When it's not important to you, you make an excuse.
Thank you. Senator Britt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director and Administrator, thank you both for being here today. Director Wray, you have publicly stated that the FBI opens 2 China-related counterintelligence investigations every day. That is a concerning statistic, to say the least. How severe is the threat the United States is facing from the Chinese Communist Party, and to the extent possible, can you characterize the nature of those threats?
So I would say, and I've been saying this since early in my tenure as FBI director, that there is no country that presents a broader, more severe, more comprehensive threat to our economic security, our innovation, and our ideas than the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party. And that threat is massive in scale and complicated in the different targets, tools, techniques, and agendas that they have, all of which are ultimately designed to advance the Chinese government at our expense. And it includes everything from cyber, where they have a bigger hacking program than every other major nation combined, to economic espionage and intellectual property theft from businesses ranging from Fortune 100 companies to small startups in Silicon Valley, to everything from big cities to rural. We've had them stealing seeds in agricultural areas, all the way to malign foreign influence, where they are targeting both officials that they're trying to influence and shape in a more pro-Chinese government, Chinese Communist Party direction, but also harassment, stalking, intimidation of dissidents and critics here in the United States, whether they're Chinese Americans or other critics of the regime. So it is a all fronts threat and requires a whole of country response, ranging not just across the intelligence community, not just across law enforcement, but working in partnership with the private sector, with universities, and with our foreign partners, because the same thing they're doing to us, they're doing to all our friends and allies as well. And I find that when I talk to our foreign partners, this is often one of the first topics they want to raise as well. So I think ultimately for us as a country, the solution is to make sure we keep this as a priority and to work in partnership with all those that I just mentioned.
Absolutely. Thank you for your candor and the comprehensive nature of your response. I hope that our leaders across the board will listen to what you just said and wake up. Director Wray, I understand you have visited the FBI Redstone in Huntsville on several occasions. We look forward to welcoming additional FBI employees to Huntsville as construction continues and new facilities are opened. My next question actually has 2 parts. First, how does FBI Redstone fit into the FBI's broader strategic plan for the future? And second, will FBI Redstone provide capacity to foster the professional development and training of your workforce to ensure that FBI has the most highly skilled and innovative and analytical workforce out there?
So this is a subject I get very excited about. I'm really excited about the future at Huntsville. We're on track now to, I think, have 19 different FBI divisions represented there. It's already up to about 1,800 employees. I can easily see it getting to about 3,000. In terms of the future, I think I see a couple things. One, I view it as an innovation hub for the FBI. We've talked a lot already in this hearing about technology and our adversaries' use of the technology and our need to use technology to be ahead of them. And that's where I think the R&D efforts really is one way of shorthanding it, I think would be really concentrated in Huntsville. We're going to have a cyber kinetic range where our cyber agents can train, an innovation hub. So it's both innovation and advanced training. We will always have Quantico as our basic training, all new agents and analysts, but I expect our sort of graduate level training to be at Redstone. and we're on track for that too. The third piece I would mention is we already have a counter IED center of excellence there with TDAC, which is where IEDs from all over the world are sent to do forensics on those IEDs, which then leads to lives saved on the battlefield. So we're looking to grow that as well. And I've been to visit there, as you said, many times, and I'm sure I will visit many more. And every time I'm struck by the buzz and the hum of the activity, and frankly, how excited and enthusiastic all of our people and our partners are there.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much. I would be remiss if I didn't encourage you and the FBI to continue leveraging Huntsville's highly skilled workforce and vast national security industrial base, whether it is network engineering, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, or counter UAS. Huntsville has the experience and stands ready to support the FBI's mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Britt. Senator Van Hollen, I'm sorry I missed.
Sorry.
You were out of order on my list, but you're next. And I would point out we are not going to make our 3:45 deadline, but we are going to do the next two senators' questions in open session, then break to go to the SVC for the classified round. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank both of you for your service to our country. Director Wray, I'm sure you would agree that the men and women of the FBI deserve a new headquarters worthy of their sacrifice. You know this has been an ongoing discussion. Let me just say here, and I'm not looking for any response, that I think that if you look at this history of this, we want to make sure that we can consolidate key parts of the agency's mission and also provide for the appropriate safety. It's my view that the Maryland sites are the ones that both achieve the mission, also provide the new headquarters at a cost that's affordable to the taxpayer, and meet the President's mission regarding equitable investments. But we'll have an opportunity in this committee and the other subcommittee that oversees the GSA and in time. I just wanted to put that out there on the table. I want to thank you and your office in Baltimore, special agents in Baltimore. They're a critical part of our joint task force there. I also want to commend the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force and the U.S. Attorney in Maryland. As a result of the FBI's investigation, they filed charges against 2 defendants for allegedly conspiring to attack one of the local power grids in Baltimore. The defendants, who were affiliated with a neo-Nazi organization, had planned to carry out these attacks in furtherance of racially or ethnically motivated violent extremist beliefs. The prosecutors alleged that the defendants had intended to use firearms to attack 5 substations that serve the Baltimore area. It's one example of an interdiction that I believe could have helped avoid a very serious problem. They don't get the attention that I think they deserve when we stop a really bad thing from happening. But I want to thank you. And just to follow up on Senator Peters' question, I see in your testimony you say that the greatest terrorism threat to our homeland is posed by lone actors or small cells who typically radicalize online and look to attack soft targets with easily accessible weapons. That describes perfectly what was intended here in Baltimore. Do you believe that this budget request before us, before the Appropriations Committee, is sufficient to combat the rising threat of domestic terrorism? In other words, does it provide you at the FBI the resources you need to meet that very real threat?
Well, certainly I think the resources that we requested will go a long way towards addressing that issue. I would say any resources the Congress sees fit to send us to deal with the threat, I can assure you that can immediately be put to good use. We have seen a growth in domestic violent extremism and homegrown violent extremism really over the years. And at the same time, as I've mentioned, I think to Senator Peters, all these other threats we've been talking about, we can't pull people off of those threats unless we neglect those. And so that's why the enhancement that's in the fiscal 24 budget becomes so important. It builds on allocations in our base that are also extremely important to help us deal with this threat. In some ways, the lone actor piece of it, part of the reason that's so important is because if you think about, by comparison to a more developed cell that's plotting attacks over years with complicated weapons, think of 747, think 9/11, as challenging as that is, and it's incredibly challenging, and it's still out there to be clear, that there are a lot of dots to connect. But lone actors, let's say two people, like the case that you mentioned, and I appreciate your recognition of our folks in the Baltimore field office and the JTTF there. There are not very many dots to connect, and it's going from flash to bang very quickly. So that makes in some ways, it makes it that much more challenging for law enforcement, which is why the enhancement is so important.
Thank you, Mr. Director. A question on the implementation of the Safer Communities Act and the FBI's role in administering the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. I know that you've been working hard to make the necessary changes to that system to accommodate some of the steps that have been taken. I think we need to go a lot farther when it comes to gun safety laws, but those were some meaningful steps. One additional area that was raised in a GAO report some time ago was the risks created by the requirement that the FBI get rid of those reports after the instant background check reports within 24 hours. The FBI pointed out numerous instances before that requirement was put in place where the ability to go back more than 24 hours was able to identify people who would put the community at risk. So my question to you is, if you don't know the answer right here, what is the risk? What are the continuing risks of that artificial 24-hour deadline that requires you to get rid of the reports after that period?
Well, as your question references, there's a whole complicated patchwork of record-keeping requirements, both what we are to retain and what we are not to retain and for how long and so forth. And the policy decisions behind those are ones that I'll leave to the policymakers, but I would be happy to follow up with you to provide a sense of the operational impact of some of those issues.
I would appreciate that, the operational impact and what you think the risks are in terms of not being able to track down folks because their records had been destroyed after 24 hours. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, Administrator, thank you for being here and for what you do. Fentanyl, as you have said here, is killing us. It's poisoning us. It is a frightening crisis, and I think each of us are seeing the impact in our states. You never want to be number one in something like this, but we understand that in Alaska we saw the greatest percentage increase in fentanyl use, fentanyl deaths last year. We spiked by 150% between 2020 and 2021. We're told that Alaska is one of fentanyl's deadliest frontiers. We're kind of proud of the claim to fame, we're the last frontier. Well, unfortunately for many people, it may be truly the last for them because fentanyl is poisoning them. And Administrator, I know you had an opportunity to meet with a particular advocate in Alaska, Sandy Snodgrass, whose son Bruce was poisoned at the age of 22. We all have so many of these stories. I don't think that we're doing near the job that we need to do to explain the lethality of fentanyl to the American people. You mentioned that you'd sent a letter out to all of your agents. Everything that we can possibly do to explain and reinforce that this is nothing to be messed with. We've talked about the fact that it's being incorporated and sold as part of cocaine or any of the other drugs that are out there, whether they are legitimately prescribed or otherwise. As a state that has we have legalized marijuana, I'm hearing now that we're seeing fentanyl being incorporated into some of the marijuana. So if you're buying it not through a licensed vendor in the state, what are you getting? This, to me, is absolutely frightening. a question, and I think this can go to both of you. We're in a state where you're not putting this in a truck and bringing it up. It's coming to us through the mail. It's coming to us through the air, and one would think we've got some intercept points where we can be doing a better job. Administrator Milgram, you mentioned that so much is being distributed now through the ease of apps, of social media. What more do we need to be doing? What more resources can we be providing, either through DEA, through FBI, to figure out how we can better intercept what we're seeing coming into our states, and particularly someplace as remote as Alaska? Do you have what you need?
Senator, if I could start on public awareness, because I couldn't agree more. I think it's one of the most vital things that all of us can be doing, because the way the cartels are doing this to make fake pills look exactly like a real drug, they are tricking intentionally. And so we talk about it as deliberate, calculated treachery or hiding it in other drugs. And so we want everyone to understand that fentanyl kills, that one pill can kill, and that there are no second chances with fentanyl. And so we have a campaign at DEA. We call it One Pill Can Kill. We do not brand it. It's on our website, so anyone can take it and use it. And we put all of the materials up there, emoji codes for social media, so a parent could know what a drug code might be. We have police departments across.
Do you have it on, if somebody's got their smartphone, does it pop up and say one pill can kill?
We would love for it to be at that point where if someone goes on a social media app, they would see something like that. Because again, we've got colleges taking it, we've got schools using it, we've got police departments. But my view is the more we can do to help all Americans understand and convince people to have conversations with their families about this threat, the more progress we can make. Even one life lost is too many. In terms of what we need, just one quick note on social media. The Deputy Attorney General brought us together recently, myself, the President's Homeland Security Advisor, with the social media companies. And she was clear in saying that this is an emergency and that she's asking the social media companies to change their terms of service to have a zero tolerance policy for narcotics trafficking, just like they do for child sexual exploitation or for terrorism, and also to report more to law enforcement. So we would be delighted also to work with members of this committee on some thoughts on social media. In terms of transportation, we are very actively tracking the way that fentanyl is coming into Alaska. And you are right in saying that because it's also so tiny amounts can be transported easily by boat, by plane. And so we're looking at all these different aspects and really trying to, across the entire country, map all of the supply routes and target the individuals and the suppliers as well as the local distributors.
And I know, we all know that there's more that can be done. And I look at this issue, I think about the issue that we have in the state when it comes to human trafficking and the rates of human trafficking that we are seeing, especially amongst our homeless youth and our Alaska Native people. This remains a concern. And so I think about our situation up north. We've got one field office in Anchorage. We have two satellite offices, one in Fairbanks and in Juneau. We've got this crisis stage, in my view, when it comes to fentanyl. We've got issues related to the human trafficking, and I worry that we don't have the resources that we need to make a difference in these just frightening areas. Administrator Wray, you can choose to comment on that. I know that we are well over our time to go into closed session, but.
I would just say, as you know, Senator, I've been up to visit our office there, and more importantly, even our law enforcement partners up there twice. And the thing that really strikes me, besides how small the footprint is in some sense, how massive the footprint is in another sense, and then last but not least, how closely the partners work together. And I say that with the vantage point of somebody who's been to all 56 FBI field offices twice, and the Anchorage field office and the relationships they've built with each other, federal, state, local partners. is pretty striking, and I think it's, in some ways, there's nothing that brings people together faster and more closely than a common, really massive challenge.
Yeah, they're good, but they're overwhelmed.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. If there are no further questions, senators may submit additional questions for the subcommittee's official hearing record. We would request that the FBI and DEA respond to those questions within 30 days. The subcommittee will recess, and we will reconvene in 10 minutes in SVC 217 to take any classified testimony. The subcommittee stands in recess subject to the call of the chair. Thank you.
A Russian man claiming to hold top-level secrets about Russian advanced bombers has just turned up at the U.S. southern border, seeking asylum. The man claims to have been an engineer at a production facility over in the city of Kazan, and he says that he possesses top-secret information about the White Swan Tu-160, which is the most advanced bomber in the Russian arsenal. U.S. border officials, they interviewed the man, and they determined that his story was in fact credible and eventually passed him off to the FBI, who are still in the process of interrogating him right now. However, analysts have pointed out that the fact that the story was even leaked to the public is an indication that perhaps the American government is encouraging other Russians who also hold top-level secrets to also escape to America. And if you thought that was interesting, well then you should click on that button below this video and check out Epic TV, one of the best no-censorship video platforms on the internet.